And this is one thing that I can tell you that is just not really talked about in fishing. And maybe because the guys are keeping a secret, or maybe because they just don't know yet. Your typical drop shot setup for smallmouth is probably, on average, I would say a 6'10" rod, medium light. A lot of guys are throwing 6 and 8 pound test. But the thing that's not talked about, a lot of guys are drop shotting nowadays with 10 and 12 pound test for smallmouth. And the reason why they're doing that is going back to the actual pressured situations. So if I was to drop shot and drop my bait down there, basically, if I was to drop my bait down there, you let it get down there, you let it fall kind of naturally, get to the bottom. This bait's actually, if I have it nose hook traditional style, on this style hook like a drop shot for smallmouth, if I have this bait, instead of having it on 8, if I have it on 12 pound test, it actually is going to fall a lot different when it comes time to actually working the bait on the actual shaking of the rod. So the heavier diameter, like I said, is going to give you a lot different look. Yeah, you can change the weight and all that stuff, but once you get initially to the bottom, that's where a heavier pound test is going to make your difference. So the 10 and 12, I can tell you from a lot of experience, and what a lot of guys are doing on tour just aren't talking about. They're throwing the heavier pound test, going the opposite way. There's a technique out there that guys are calling kind of power shotting. Basically, what power shotting is, throwing your drop shot, normal setup, but they're throwing our drop shots on like maybe a 5/8 or a 3/4 ounce weight, just for trying to get a reaction out of the drop shot by flinging down there really quick. And that definitely works. One thing in particular that I can tell you, when do I ever change my weight? I always start out with a quarter. I would say 9 times out of 10, a 1/4 ounce. Then from there I go up. It depends. If you're in current or if you're doing something where you have to have the heavier weight, then yes, you got to change your weight size. But one time in particular, I can tell you that I learned years ago where if you're on your trolling motor and you're straight dropping on these fish, sometimes using like a 3/4 or even a 1 ounce, I'm talking crazy heavy weight. I'm talking you're fishing 30 feet of water, 25 feet of water. You get that bait to rush down there, and sometimes with the smallmouth, you have to almost get that reaction at a lot of these fish, because there's a difference that you have to take notice to when dropping on fish. There's a difference from the 7 o'clock hour to the 10 o'clock hour, from the 10 o'clock hour to the 1 o'clock hour. Once that sun height gets really high, a lot of times you have to be careful how you're drop shotting on, let's say, a rock pile fish, because your boat's casting a giant shadow once that sun gets really high. And smallmouth tend to be like, if you ever seen dolphin out in the ocean, you see one piece of plywood or something sitting out there, or a 2x4 sitting out in the water floating, there's a bunch of mahi-mahi underneath of it. Smallmouth are the same way. When it comes to that shadow from the boat, a lot of times I've seen to where, if you catch a smallmouth, you pull it up and there's other with it, they won't go back to that rock pile. They'll actually go sit in your shadow of your boat. So it's something you have to be conscientious of, because it happens, and I don't think a lot of guys actually realize that. They'll catch the one fish off of it, and some of the other fish will follow it up, and they're like, oh, they're all gone, let's go to the next spot. All you have to do, honestly, is drift back off the rock pile a little ways, and A, just throw a cast to it, or B, just let it settle down a little bit and get back on top of it again. And you'll find out that them smallies are still there, but they just got into your boat shadow and they kind of backed off. So, something to think about for actual drop shotting for them smallies. Besides that, there's a big question out there: do you throw lead or do you throw tungsten? And a lot of times, honestly, I can tell you that tungsten really, really comes into play. I'm going to use the St. Lawrence, for example. On the St. Lawrence River, there's a lot of dragging going on, to where you're throwing your drop shot out there and you're basically allowing your boat just to drift down into the current. To me, that's where tungsten plays a big, big part, because when you're doing a lot of that drift, you're hitting a lot of shells down there, you're hitting rock down there, so you're constantly feeling the whole way down. And a lot of times when them smallmouth bite a drop shot, it's so subtle, they'll actually follow it down with the current with you. And a lot of times you can't detect that bite. But when throwing tungsten, you can actually feel the difference from a bite versus lead.
The information Bass University provides isn't your basic run-of-the-mill fishing video. This is specific information from A to Z to help you learn, get to the water, and become a better angler quickly.